Welcome to Write Books That Sell Now, the podcast helping you write, publish, and market your book faster, better, and smarter. Here are your hosts, working hard and having fun doing it, Candace L. Davis, Anita Henderson, and Carol Dunlop.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Write Books That Sell Now podcast. You know, we are the podcast that gives you real insight into the real world of becoming a successful self-published author. We are here on video, on audio. I'm Anita Henderson, one-third of the dynamic trio that is Write Books That Sell Now, here with my co-creators, Candace L. Davis and Carol Dunlop. Hey, ladies.
Hey, guys. How are y'all?
Candace, eyebrows going up. What's going on?
Beautiful day.
Beautiful day.
Yes, it is.
It's getting chilly. It's starting to feel like fall. I like it.
Me too.
I like it. Well, listen, everybody. We're going to be talking about, on this episode, how you can write a business building book by sharing the stories of other people. Oftentimes, we're telling our own story, our own insight, sharing our knowledge and expertise, or even our life story in the form of a memoir. But our guest, Suzanne Bernier, on this episode is going to be sharing how she combines stories of other people to write her phenomenal book. We're excited about that. But before we get to that, let's find out what's on Carol's mind today.
Candace said it was always dangerous to ask me stuff, but this is what's on my mind. As everyone knows, the election is over. Thank God. I'm so glad that it's finished. But my thought was, everybody's hating on President-elect Trump because he won or whatever. But my thing about him was, look at what he did. Nobody believed he could win. Nobody, a lot of people didn't get behind him, walked off from him, laughed at him, said he was totally crazy. How could he even think about winning the presidency? And he just kept marching straight on through to the White House until he actually won. So my lesson in that is, I'm not saying that I'm a Trump supporter, but my lesson in that is you can't ever give up on your dreams. I don't care how crazy they seem. I don't care how outlandish it seems. I don't care who doesn't support you or who doesn't get on your bandwagon. You can never, ever, ever give up on your dreams, because your dreams are what drives you. And whether you like him or not, look at what that man did. And that's what's on my mind today.
Follow your dreams. I like that, Carol.
So, Carol, I do like that too. And I had sort of a little bit of a different response. I think my response was more that this is the time, we're living in a time where we have more power than we've ever had, right, as individual citizens. With the power of social media, we can get our message out over Twitter in 10 seconds, right? We have the power to enact change. We have the power to start a movement. We have the power to reach out to representatives who are on Twitter, as we know, just like we are, or on other social media. So kind of the lesson I took from it was I've stayed off social media mostly for the last several days because there's so much negativity on both sides. And I'm waiting until we get to a place where whatever side you're on, and I'm not a Trump supporter, or I was not a Trump supporter. I'm always going to support my president in hopes that he will do good things. But whatever side you're on, you are now living in a time where we have more power and more of a voice than we've ever had. So whether you use that power and that voice to build your own business so that you can bring economic power to your community, which becomes political clout. We all know economic power in this country often equals political clout. So if you use that power for that, or if you use it to start a movement, use it. So I'm holding off on social media for a while to let people get through all the emotional aftermath. And I'm hoping that when I come back in a few days or a couple of weeks, that there'll be more about what you can do to get the changes made in this country that you want to see made.
I love that, Candace, because I think that's what
I love it. And I'm going to guess it's probably going to be more like a couple of weeks than a couple of days that you get back on social media. The smoke has died down and I haven't been on social media. And then really, what's the word? I guess it's a mixture of shock, disappointment, surprised, believe it or not, that so much people have posted about the recent elections and the election of Donald Trump. And not so much that people surprise me, it's just the fact that I'm interested to see that so many entrepreneurs, people who I network with on a regular basis, are posting things that are really borderline of could be offensive to other people. I think that unfortunately, this election and probably leading up to it, quite frankly, over the last 8 years, we as adult Americans have somehow lost, or we are losing, our sense of being an adult and understanding that some things just are really not appropriate to share and to say. And I think I wrote a message about this at some point in one of our newsletters, or maybe I did a blog post somewhere. Something pops into your head that you should say it is a skill and a reality that adults learn. We try to teach children this, that you don't just say everything that comes to your head, that you actually do have to think about the feelings of other people who you are speaking to and the repercussions of your words. And somehow it just seems like people have lost that filter in what we say. I think that people seem to have, over the last 8 years, gotten frustrated with what has been tagged as political correctness, but really, quite frankly, is responsible adulthood. And not saying everything that comes, into your head, it shouldn't always come out of your mouth. And somehow we've just decided that it's okay. If I feel a certain way, I should be able to say whatever I want to say. And I just think that's irresponsible adulthood. We don't teach children that, and I don't think we teach adults in our verbal nor in our communication on social media. We all have an opinion. Opinions, everybody has one. It's kind of like something else that everyone has. And that doesn't mean you need to share your opinion with everyone. And that includes social media. I remember back in the day when social media first started, and we were, as adults, were cautioning young people to be very careful with what they posted on social media, because once it's out there, because it is, after all, the World Wide Web. And anybody can find it at any point and make a judgment or a distinction or keep from hiring you. And all these things we told young people about social media, we're not even practicing those things now as adults. And I think that's really unfortunate. And my hope is that we somehow wrangle our sense of civility and understand that people have feelings and that words hurt, and that just because you have an opinion doesn't mean you need to share it with everyone, including your social media friends and family and followers and connections. So yes, Carol, definitely I encourage everybody to follow your dreams when it makes sense. I am interestingly and curiously watching what happens to America as this new administration is ushered in. So.
Well, Anita, I will just say this based on what you said. I have actually made a very clear decision about 3 different local businesses that I will never do business with. Not because they were on the other side of the political spectrum from me, because a lot of my close friends don't believe in the same political platform that I believe in, but because these business owners were so vitriolic in their posts and so disrespectful in their posts. I just made a very clear decision that they'll never get any of my money.
Right. Yeah, that has happened in a lot of circles and groups that I've seen. I was just actually talking to my husband this morning about an industry involved with, and there's quite a bit of chatter about that in that particular group. And I think that people need to, sometimes people say, well, I'm willing to risk it just to be able to share my opinion. And if that's your stance, then thumbs up to you, hats off, go for it, I suppose. But I think that we will all see the results of it at some point, and whether we admit it or not, it probably will not be the best thing. So there you have it.
Yes.
So Carol, I want to thank you again for bringing up the subject that has depressed me for the last week and a half.
I didn't mean to depress you. Look at it. That was the reason why I didn't want to even say anything about it.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
I know. But you know, what Anita said was so very important. We need to watch what we say. And I think and I wanted to jump in there. The reason why I think that people are like, don't have any filter is because of social media. It's the blame on social media, because you sit behind your screen all day and you just type whatever you want and you don't have to look anybody in the face. I think if we really actually had to do live talking to people, we wouldn't say the silly, crazy, out of this world, my God, I can't believe you said that type of stuff that comes out of people's fingers, because it's not coming out of their mouth straight to your face. But like you said, I love what you said, Candace, that we have more power than we have ever had. So we need to take back our power and do what we need to do. And the reason I brought that whole thing up was to say, look at what he did. He made it all the way to the top. Yes. But and I love what Anita said, do we need to watch what we say? Yes. So we have a big job in front of us, and we just need to take the bull by our horns and do what we need to do and stop being lazy and blaming it on somebody else, because it's our deal. I
totally agree. And while we're sitting here sort of bad mouthing social media, we also know that social media can be used for good things.
Yes.
And one of the people who knows that especially well is today's guest, Suzanne Bernier, whose last name I'm going to pronounce correctly throughout this entire podcast episode. Let me give you the formal introduction to Suzanne. Suzanne Bernier is a certified, award-winning, and internationally recognized author, crisis management consultant, instructor, and speaker who has helped governments, communities, and companies plan for and respond to disasters for nearly 20 years. Suzanne was recently named 2016's Continuity and Resilience Consultant of the Year for North America by the Business Continuity Institute, and she has received multiple awards. She is the author of a book that I love, Disaster Heroes. It's a book that tells the stories of ordinary men, women, and children, people like you and me, everyday people, who have done extraordinary things in the face of crisis and disaster to help their communities respond, recover, and rebuild. Suzanne, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, thank you for having me today. How is everybody today?
We're good. You survived our banter, so you're doing good.
That's all they're talking about here in Canada too, believe me.
I can imagine.
I'm sure.
But it's kind of nice to look at it from an outsider's perspective.
Yeah. I'd like to be looking at it from an outsider's perspective sometimes. So Suzanne, rather than me explain, could you please give our viewers and listeners an overview of what Disaster Heroes is and whose stories it tells?
Sure. What I wanted to do was, I've been in disaster management now for almost 20 years. Before that, I was a journalist. And I remember thinking, even as a journalist, when I'd be preparing my newscast, because I was a radio newscaster, I'd be preparing my newscast in the morning, and I would have to prioritize what your stories would be. And even back then, I noticed that most of them were bad stories. And even though I wanted to talk about some good things that would happen, there really wouldn't be much time left in the newscast to do that. Anyway, fast forward to me several years later being at a disaster site, specifically after Katrina in New Orleans. And it came to me that there are so many behind the scenes good stories that happen after disasters. All you see really in the media, and all those who are fortunate enough to not be in the middle of a disaster don't really get to see all of the great stuff that happens behind the scenes every time there's a major disaster. All we see is the images of the death and the devastation and the destruction, which is horrible, but there are also great things that happen behind the scenes that no one gets to hear about. So then I thought I really wanted to give their side of the story, the positive side, to show people what really happens behind the scenes and how many good people come from it and how many good things come from disasters, to try to, one, inspire people to let them know that good still really exists, and two, to let everybody know that these are all everyday people who weren't trained in responding to disasters, but just by having one idea or picking up the phone or telling somebody something, they were able to do these amazing things to help people survive and recover and rebuild after disasters that everybody's heard of.
So since we were talking about social media at the top of the show, and I would love to hear an example of one of the stories from the book, can you share the story from the book where the mother and daughter use social media to help in the wake of a disaster?
Yeah, so a lot of people probably still remember the coverage of the Joplin tornado that occurred a few years back. It was to date still the deadliest and costliest tornado in U.S. history. And there was a mother and daughter duo at the time who lived just outside of the Joplin area, who lived through that destruction that happened on that Sunday in May. And although they had no training in emergency management, the daughter had just graduated from a social media program, was very active on social media, but this was still, it was 2011. Social media still wasn't completely used and recognized by, let's say, at least our first response agencies, as well as even the Red Cross and other agencies. They still hadn't really adopted Twitter or Facebook as a means to communicate during a disaster. However, Rebecca, the daughter of Genevieve, the daughter of the duo, thought that with her training and her background and her connections through Facebook, maybe she would be able to create this page where people would go in the community and be able to find whatever information they could after this deadly tornado. She was noticing that a lot of people were just Googling, and you'll notice people do that every time they want to find out something, they Google the word, and then all of this information comes up. You don't really know what's true, what's not true, if it's coming from a valid source or not. So their idea was, let's implement a community-based Facebook page, and we'll call it Joplin Tornado Info, and that's where we will direct everybody to go in the community, whether it's volunteer opportunities or where to go to get food or shelter or find and locate loved ones. Whatever it is, this would become a clearinghouse where everybody knew that this was a place to go where you would get up-to-date, valid information that Rebecca and Genevieve pulled together from various sources like police, like fire, like EMS, the hospitals, all of the different areas that had validated information they would post on this Facebook page. And this was at a time where this had never been thought of or done before. So they really were what I call social media pioneers in the emergency management and disaster management field.
Because in that situation, obviously a lot of people were without power, but a lot of them still also had cell phone access, right?
Yeah, and a lot of people don't realize that that happens. A lot of people say, well, what good is social media or having a tablet or having a phone if you don't have power to be able to power it? But these days, a lot of the time when networks go down, you can still access Facebook and social media through your phones. Also, during large-scale disasters, one thing that happens is a lot of these cell phone providers will come in and they'll have portable charging units that they will offer for free for people, regardless of what network they're on or what cell phone provider they use, can come in and charge their accessories so that they can keep up to date through social media and their phone on what's going on throughout the disaster. So there still is access to power, and it's still very, very important. Now, I'm a crisis communicator, so I train people in how to respond to disasters and to always keep in mind that it's not just about social media now, that we still need to rely on the traditional ways that we would communicate to the public through the media, maybe door knocking if we need to, if there's no power, but that it really has given us this extra tool now that allows us to reach so many more people so much quicker than before. And this is something that Rebecca and Genevieve figured out before the government was even able to figure out. They were getting calls from people of authority in positions of authority in different agencies at the time who still had not thought that social media was a valid way to communicate during a disaster. We're being told literally to shut their operations down. Wow. And now it's the opposite, where now they are being touted as a model example of how communities now can use social media in that way to be able to help communicate to their populations, to let them know what they need to know, and even to reunite them with loved ones. There's a couple of stories where Rebecca and Genevieve were able to do that just through this one idea that at the time was really very innovative, and it was not a long shot, but they didn't know for sure how it would go over, but it ended up being one of the best things that they've ever done in their lives, they tell me.
That is so wild that the government will call them and say shut the thing down when they're doing a good service. It's just like mind blown on that one. Jeez.
It's just that I guess I could see from the one, this really hadn't been studied yet, and people have to, and organizations have to welcome new innovative technologies in after they've had a chance to evaluate and assess what they'd be good for and what they wouldn't be good for. And I can see how even though it seems like, well, now it's a non-issue, but back then it really was, where they still didn't know for sure how this whole thing would work. And I guess through them, they wanted to be able to make sure that it was a coordinated response. And they thought that perhaps having someone externally develop something like this might impact negatively on the operation. So I could see both sides. But it really was very brave, yes, of this mother-daughter duo to still move on and do what they believed in. And it ended up being the right thing.
So I was lucky enough to come to your book signing in New Orleans, and I got to meet Rebecca and Genevieve. We're still Facebook friends, so I see them all the time on social media. We're not against social media here, people. We're not.
No, that's not. We can't be. It's like everything else. Some things are good. Some things are not so good. Some things are terrible, awful. But, I think even the worst thing, even as, that's why I love your story. Even in this time of disaster and things going crazy, there's good that comes out of it. I mean, these two women thought of this thing and nobody asked them anything. They just said, hey, what if we did so-and-so? And then they persevered and they kept going, which was really what I guess our lives are about, to persevere and to keep going, even after disaster. And I remember that Joplin tornado thing because unfortunately that was the time when my husband was actually in the hospital. Something that happened, he had already had a stroke and he had recovered from it. But I think, I know what it was. He had this horrible tongue swelling thing where they had to intubate him, and he was in like almost a coma for like 2 or 3 days. So I was definitely in the hospital right before that thing happened. And I saw it happening on TV right then. So I definitely remember that. But, thank God we're all here.
Yeah, it was a dramatic event. I think most of us remember when that happened. And, at the book signing, it was amazing, the people who turned out for it, because several of them were heroes that were profiled in the book. And it was, for me, so exciting to meet them in person, yet they were all very, very humble. None of them presented themselves as if, they were there for the spotlight or they were there to get, a piece of the book or anything like that. They were there to support Suzanne and her effort in the book. And it was a group of really amazing people. But for someone starting from scratch, Suzanne, how did you, one, choose the people that you wanted to profile? Because I know you've met many, many people who've done great things. So how did you narrow that down? And then how did you get them to share such personal stories, a lot of which were really traumatic events for them?
Right. It was really tough to be able to narrow it down. And I remember, and Candace, you probably remember us discussing a few times throughout the process of me trying to figure out one versus the other, and should I add another one in or take one out? And there's just so many heroes that there's no way I could never actually end the book if I kept adding one in and adding another one in, because I get calls all the time too from colleagues who would say, oh, I have somebody else that would be amazing in your book. And I'd say, oh yeah, they would be too, but if I keep adding, I'll never finish the actual, at least getting one out, which is good though, because then this means that we could have as many disaster heroes books.
Right. Volume 2 and 3.
Yeah.
The movie. Let's go.
For sure. But what I wanted to do was outline a couple of different stories because of how they reflected the difference in the types of heroes that we perceive, I guess, during disasters. So the first story, let's say, who was the inspiration, Ronnie, I picked Ronnie Goldman's story. He's from New Orleans. And I had met him after working and volunteering in New Orleans after Katrina. But I picked his story, for example, because it was a story of how he just picked up, not just, but had an idea, picked up the phone, made one call into a local radio talk show, making a suggestion, let's start a fundraising campaign to rebuild the New York City Fire Department after 9/11. And just by actually having that idea and picking up the phone and doing something, which really is not your typical what you would think, a hero would do in a disaster, but it was definitely heroic. And he was able to raise over $1 million just by making that one phone call. But a lot of people might think in their heads, oh, I want to do something, or I wish they would raise money, or they're in trouble. But he actually did something about it. He just picked up the phone. And then another one that I wanted to portray was Evan and Jeff Parness, their story, who were the founders of something called the New York Says Thank You Foundation. And that really was something that came something really good that came out of something really bad, which was obviously the 9/11 attacks. But a couple of years later, a young boy, and this is really why I chose that story as well, because it was through the idea of a 5-year-old child that this amazing movement and organization now is born, which is a couple years after 9/11. Evan Parnas, who's a young boy out of New York City, is watching the news coverage of a San Diego wildfire a couple years after 9/11. Now, Evan's father, Jeff, had lost his best friend and business partner in the 9/11 terror attack. They're watching the news coverage of this wildfire in San Diego, and Evan asks his dad, he wants to try to send things to these children he saw on the coverage. It was just the day after Halloween, that obviously had not been able to go out trick-or-treating, had not been able to celebrate Halloween. Evan realized that he had 2 or 3 costumes that he wore the night before, and wanted to do something to try to send something back to these children who had nothing and had lost everything in the fire. So Jeff, after hearing what Evan wanted to do, prompted him more with coming up with more ideas of what other things maybe we could give and donate to these children who survived this disaster. And then from that evolved this idea that they'd gather all of these donations, they'd rent a U-Haul truck, plaster a sign on it that says, New York says thank you. And on behalf of New Yorkers, to say thank you, San Diego and all of the country, for what you did for New York after 9/11. We're going to drive across the country from New York to San Diego. We're going to give these people who've gone through this disaster all of these donations that we've raised, and we'll be able to drive across the country with that message that New York says thank you. And now it's this huge organization that deploys first responders who were there or lost people in 9/11 to rebuild communities across America every anniversary on 9/12, the day after, because that's what Jeff's message was. This is not about 9/11. This is about the day after, and how everybody came together across the country to help New Yorkers. And now it's their turn to give back. And they will do that now every single year on the anniversary, which they have been and continue to do. And now there are first responders that get together not only from 9/11 in New York, but from every other community now that has been helped to rebuild. Now the next year and the next project that they pick at another devastated area, other responders that have been involved in the other previous areas or have been helped through the other responders. Now they all get together. It's just this huge thing that's now developed from the idea of a 5-year-old child and his father's willingness to pursue it and actually make something happen.
So Suzanne, I mean, a lot of us have ideas in the face of disaster as to how we can help or what we can do, but most of us don't take action on those ideas. And the people in this book all seem to share something special. Doesn't matter the age range, socioeconomic range, every gender, but they all seem to share something special that allows them to not just have the idea, but to take action and move that idea forward. What have you found that they all share in common?
I think that one of the things I noticed that they all shared, and I didn't know whether, I really didn't start looking for these people with the idea of analyzing what makes a hero, but that ended up being part of what I discovered when I was interviewing all of these people, was that they all did have certain characteristics. One of them was tenacity, first of all, where, yeah, you can have an idea and even maybe try to make it happen, but it's going to take more than, it sounds just as easy as that one phone call, but it actually meant that Ronnie had to decide, okay, I'm actually going to make that call. And then when I make it, I'm going to keep going to interviews, and I'm going to keep promoting my message. And it's not just a one-off where then you can just go and leave it behind afterwards. If you're actually going to do something and suggest something, you have to follow through. And every one of these people, because they believed so much that they could help and that they could make a difference and they could help save lives and rebuild a community, they just kept going and wouldn't take no and wouldn't accept perhaps what the criticisms might be from other people, saying, well, yeah, but you're just one person and how much can you really do? But that's really what makes a hero, is them not being dissuaded by others who might not take those steps because they might not think that they could pull through, or that something would actually be able to grow from one idea. But these were all people who believed in what they were promoting, and I guess in a way believed in themselves. And I don't even know that they really recognized that they believed in themselves, but they obviously did, because they believed in their idea and that it was a good one, enough so that they pushed it. I'll talk a bit about Brandon Fisher, who, with him, he's kind of a perfect example of not letting go and having that tenacity. But Brandon Fisher, some people might already be aware and some might not be, is after the Chilean mine collapse, and I think probably most of us in our generation anyway remember watching that whole thing and the rescue and then pulling the men out one by one, those 33 miners that were trapped for so many days underground. And I remember watching that whole thing too. And to me, in my head, at first I thought, wow, the people who were in the capsule who were then actually pulling those men out, to me, in my head, those were the heroes. But there were so many people behind the scenes, and who I think really, and who I feature in the book is Brandon Fisher. I think he's really the reason those 33 men are alive today. He's the one who developed the drill that was the one that was the strongest in the world, that was able to actually drill down into that tough enough rock to be able to reach those miners in half the time of what their original plan was to be, and the original equipment that the Chilean government had at the time. But Brandon, watching and hearing what kind of equipment they had and knowing how long it would take them to reach those miners, he knew that by the time they reached them with that equipment, they would probably all be dead. So he had no contacts within the Chilean government, knew nobody at all, but through perseverance and a belief that he knew that he probably had the only equipment in the world that would be able to drill down in half the time and take those men out in half the time alive, he persevered, kept making calls every single day, scouring the internet, him and his wife. Finally, they were able to, several days later, actually get hold of somebody within the Chilean government, explain to them that they might possibly have the only equipment in the world that will be able to save their men. And then 2 weeks later, they are on the ground in Chile with their equipment, with their team. And then 33 days later, it was exactly 33 days after they started drilling, that they were able to start pulling out all of those men.
That's amazing. It's so interesting because you have everything from people who use technology that's available to all of us that doesn't really cost anything, right? Facebook, all the way up to, that's like not an inexpensive piece of equipment. That's like real technology in terms of man hours and money that went into that. But it really didn't matter where they were on that spectrum, whether you have no money to spend on it or it's not a problem that can be solved by money. Because the problem after Joplin of getting information out wasn't going to be solved by money. It was solved by something that existed for us already, social media, or a problem that needed some money and real resources behind it. You kind of run the spectrum with the heroes that you profile. And that's one thing I love about the book. It shows that it doesn't matter what resources you have. If you have the ideas, you can find the resources. Like you were talking about Ronnie making a call that ended up raising $1 million. He didn't have to go in his own pocket and get $1 million, but he could make the contacts and raise $1 million. So it doesn't necessarily matter where you're starting. It's that you have the idea and that you see it through all the way through to the end.
Yeah. And I think one of the qualities besides perseverance is also the ability to pull people together. I think all of these people, without them even realizing it, were people. Is that an expression? You know what I mean? They were people persons, where
Yes.
they were able to pull everybody together from different agencies and organizations that maybe never had really welcomed in the average ordinary citizen who didn't have training in or didn't have a background in responding to a disaster. They had the ability to have an idea and be able to talk with people and get people to accept their idea, believe in it, and bring people together. That's just something that I think some people really have a skill in being able to do that, and others might not, but everybody that I sat down with obviously had that skill within them too. Not only were they brave enough and believed in what they thought could change and help, but also were really able to communicate that to others and bring others in to be able to support them. Because, and I've said this before that, there's never been a disaster ever in mankind where one person or one organization was the one who saved those lives and saved that community. It takes so many hundreds of thousands of people coming together and so many agencies and organizations. But these were people that were able, through one idea, then all of a sudden start a snowball effect where everybody started buying in and helping. With Brandon Fisher, for example, he had said no matter what, he was going to get his team there as well as his equipment. And they would think about it later. They were sending everybody in. Yet they had called, and it ended up that UPS, they were going to ship through them, and then all of a sudden UPS found out this amazing thing that Brandon Fisher's company was doing, so they offered to then fly all of the equipment or ship all of the equipment there and back through the UPS Foundation instead, which that also never would have happened if they hadn't made that connection. Right. And then UPS found out and made the right connections to their foundation. And it was just a beautiful example, which we see every time in a disaster, but unfortunately you don't really see that in the media coverage, that there's so many different organizations and people pulling together to help afterwards. And every one of these stories ended up being just not about that person, but also about communities and the world coming together to help respond after these large-scale disasters.
Yeah, it's really, as you mentioned, because we don't see enough of the good side of these things in the media, it really is an amazing book to me. For that reason, it's because it does highlight what went well, who was willing to sacrifice, who was willing to contribute, how people were willing to pull together. And a lot of times the media stories stop 2 or 3 days after the event, or they become, old news 2 or 3 days after the event, and you just get an occasional update. A lot of times it's a death count or something like that you get, and nothing else. And it leaves people thinking that it's a hopeless situation, and it's really not. But I want to talk to you also about your book publishing and marketing process, which you did some really cool things in. But first, we're going to take a quick break for a word from our sponsors, and we'll be right back with Suzanne Bernier. Hey guys, this is Candace from Go Write Something, and if you're struggling to write your book or just to get started, here's an exercise that can help. Sit down and take a minute and make a list of all the reasons why you want to write your book. But in this case, I want you to be completely selfish and write the list of things of what's in it for you. Are you trying to build your business as a speaker? Are you just dying to tell this story? Or are you trying to launch a business based on the information in your book? Make a list of all of those reasons, and once you understand your purpose in writing your book, it'll be a lot easier to design the structure of your book and decide what content to include. Now go write something.
Get the Write Books That Sell Now free video training series. It's absolutely free, and you will learn a bunch of tips, tricks, and hacks from each of us to help you finally get your book done. In these free videos, we open the door to give you a taste of what you'll find in our high-value, information-packed online course. You'll get information on writing, publishing, and marketing your book, and it's all for free. To access the free video training series, just visit us at www.writebooksthatsellnow.com.
Okay, we're back. Thank you everyone for kind of hanging with us. We are talking about just realizing your dreams and being that one, I guess, link in the chain that starts this other thing happening, and it becomes awesome and wonderful. And I am just totally enjoying myself listening to Suzanne Bernier and talking about her book, Disaster Heroes. So, I'm kind of sad that the story part has ended, but that just means I have to go get the book and read the whole thing. I've only seen pieces of it, but now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty stuff and talk about the totally unique thing she did to kind of publish it. So take it away, Candace.
So Suzanne, Carol, if you don't know, is our social media guru. So I would love for you to share, because she's going to be so excited when she hears about this, how you use social media to launch and promote your book.
Yes, well, and I hadn't really been very familiar. I've been familiar with promoting the values of social media and using social media during a disaster or setting up social media beforehand for a crisis, but not so much in the area of marketing myself or even really marketing the book. I hadn't even thought about that when I was in the book writing process at all. It was just afterwards I had teamed up with a young marketing student through my alma mater that I'd reached out to them to say I wanted some help on developing some kind of a social media and other marketing campaign for the book. And so they teamed me up with this young man who was amazing. And we developed a social media marketing strategy because he knew all about that much more than I did. And I said, sure, you just do whatever you think we should do. And it ended up being amazing. And I would have had no idea. People started reaching out to me from all over the world, even Australia, because of some tweet that they had seen about disaster heroes coming out. And it was amazing. And now this is a conference, a hero conference that I attend every year, just based on this random tweet that they had seen and about my book. And then I realized, wow, okay, so we need to do this regularly. And so we continue to not only use social media to be able to promote the launch of the book, which we did, and we pushed out a lot of information leading up to the launch, the official launch of the book. And then afterwards, though, kept on it as well, because then I realized that, oh, this is actually something that I should be doing, not just to promote the launch, but afterwards to continue on to promote getting the book out and people being aware of it. And now, yeah, I would say that more people know about the book. I know, in fact, people know about the book around the world now, specifically because of that whole social media campaign and continuing to be able to have a Twitter profile as well as a Facebook one. I think I've focused more on Twitter than Facebook the last while, but you know, it's not really that I thought one was better than the other. It's just that I've chosen to focus a little bit more on Twitter, but have had a lot of great marketing just through social media specifically, and people for sure who would never have heard of or known that the book even existed if we hadn't done that and continued to push out disaster heroes through social media.
Well, I think that speaks to the subject matter of the book, because you can have a book about, I don't know, chasing an ant or something, and you can tweet about it on, put it on Twitter or put it on social media, and it might not have that same impact. But just with you talking about what the book is about, and I'm sure you did that, if you were dealing with a young person who was doing social media, oh, you know, you were just in God's hands almost, because they live on social media, the millennials, you know, and people who are really, really into it. And I'm sure they got your story out, and for people to hear just a little bit that I've heard, and before I had heard more about your book, but just kind of the stories and things like that, it makes me is like, okay, where's that book? Where's that book? I want it right now in my hands so I could read it. And you're so right about all the people that nobody knew about. And I think that was one of the things that drove people to say, we need to, you know, find the person who wrote this, because this is totally awesome, because nobody's talking about the people that you don't know about, because you don't know about them and all the things that they've done. So, you know, that is a lesson in marketing and social media. You have something great to say, you have something that's going to resonate with the people who want to hear it, and you actually take the initiative, have the tenacity to push that tweet button and get it out there. And I think that you can't do anything but win after that, because you've got an awesome story. And I think so many people don't put their stories out there because they're just, I don't know what to post, and I don't know what, just post one, pick one and start posting, and boom, there you go. It's good. It's all good.
I think the other
it was
thing that
super
really
smart to get someone else to do that for you initially. That was awesome.
And I think that's one of the biggest things that I've learned throughout the whole process, was that there are certain things that I was good at and that I knew that I could do, and there are certain things I'm not so good at. And I recognized that right from the beginning and sought help in those areas with people that I knew were better than me at certain things, and that I would be able to focus what I'm talented at and what I know I'm good at, and then make sure that I have a team behind me that will be able to do the things that they're good at that I'm not so good at. And I think that we all have to recognize that there's certain, you might really be a great writer, but not so great at marketing. So get somebody to help you with that. You might be a great marketer, but not so good at writing. So get somebody to help you with that. And I think that was one of my biggest lessons learned throughout this whole process, because this was my first book. I was a first timer. I didn't know anything when I first started. But luckily, to have people like Candace and others helping me throughout doing the things that I needed help with, so that I could focus on the things that I wanted to focus on, which is finding the heroes, interviewing them, sitting down with them. Oh, sorry, I didn't really answer the question before about sitting down with each one of these heroes, and but that was very emotional as well. Not only sitting down with them, but them being able to share their stories. But I think that for some reason I may have this ability to be able to sit down one-on-one with people, regardless of who they are and what they did, and I don't feel intimidated, they don't feel intimidated. We're just, like we're doing right now, where I think maybe one of my strengths has been that I'm able to communicate well with people, and not purposely, but they want to tell me their stories. So in the end, I didn't even really have to sit there and ask them a list and prompt them about what their story was. They just opened up to me. And by the end of it, we're 3 hours in, and oh my God, they're still talking, and they're crying and they're laughing. It was incredible. But I knew that I was good at that part. But then I knew I needed help with certain other areas. So I reached out to other people that could help me with other areas.
Well, I think that is the whole thing about your book. Your book says heroes, not hero, but it's more than one. So this whole team got together to put this amazing story out there, which I think you should definitely develop this into a movie. And I will buy a couple of tickets for that, because I just think, even if it's on Lifetime, which is not a bad network, but you know what Lifetime's about, women crying, that type of thing. And that might be a good place for it. But a movie just celebrating goodness, or even one of the Christian stations, here I am trying to plug your book, but I just think it should be a movie. I think it should be awesome. People need that feel good stuff inside of them. And, you were talking about how you have this knack. I definitely think you have this knack of making people feel at ease, because I've never met you. I've only seen your picture that we post all over our website, and Candace has talked about you. But when you came on, you have this presence about you that, it's okay, baby. Just tell me what you got to tell me. It'll be all right.
She's so calm. She's so calm.
Yeah, and welcoming and at ease. So I can see why people just talk to you and tell them their whole life story, tell them everything. But we got to get more into the publishing stuff. I'm just rambling here. I'm just so excited.
No, I don't even want to talk about the publishing stuff. I want to talk about how Disaster Heroes has impacted you professionally, because when we first met, you were speaking and consulting, but one of the things you wanted to do was to do more speaking, and your book was a platform for that for you. How has that shifted things for you in your professional life?
Yeah, that has really improved my profile. Definitely increased my profile in the business. I had a pretty good profile before, and I think that I also wanted to, and Candace, I think we talked about this before throughout, was I kind of wanted to wait until I had a certain amount of profile in the industry before I even released a book, because I thought that I would need that extra, to be able to do that, to have some kind of profile already.
Sure.
But then I knew that perhaps by releasing this, it could potentially increase my profile, hopefully. Definitely not do anything to harm it, if anything. Right? So I didn't realize, though, how much it really would increase my profile, and in areas that I never really targeted. I just kind of blasted it out through social media all over the place, and not really, even though realistically I should say, oh yeah, you should have a target audience and which ones they are, but really I didn't really have one. I just thought, I think everybody to know these stories in my industry and just the general public. But in the end, it ended up really increasing my profile in the industry, where I started getting calls and emails from people asking me to speak about the book, instead of just about, before I would speak at conferences about how to prepare for a disaster, how to use social media during a disaster, how to plan for a pandemic, those kinds of things. Now, all of a sudden, these same conferences are asking me to come in and speak about disaster heroes, talk a bit about the book, talk a bit about the inspirational side of the business, which really in our industry we hadn't really been talking about. So now I've been able to be recognized for this other area, this other side of disaster management, the more human side, that's allowed me now to even shift my focus a bit with what I want to do in my business too. It's kind of helped me not only gain I guess, gain some recognition within the field, but also let me know that, oh, maybe there's certain other areas that I want to focus more on in the field too. Now, based on this book and based on my focus, which is really about the behind the scenes heroes, and maybe focusing more on how we can make sure that we can work with the general public and try to not convince, but try to ensure that everybody recognizes the value of everyday citizens after a disaster and how we can use them more. So I'm trying to shift the focus a bit in our industry on that. But so yeah, I've been speaking at these conferences all over the world really the last couple of years. A lot of in the US, I'll get requests from Chicago or other areas of people who've heard about the book or heard me talk about the book. I was just in the Netherlands earlier this year talking about the book, and the UK, and just so many places. And I guess the biggest one, I think that probably I would say the pinnacle maybe was I was asked to speak at the White House a couple of months ago. and I was able to give out copies of the book to these people who've done amazing things. It was an award ceremony for communities who've been recognized by FEMA on behalf of the U.S. government for coming up with creative and innovative ways to prepare their communities for disasters. And so there were 21 award winners, either groups or people, and I was asked to be the keynote speaker at this ceremony that would happen to be at the White House. And then I was able to meet each one of these amazing new heroes and give them a signed copy of the book and talk to them. And that was just an amazing, I mean, I never would have had that on my list of, okay, to do, speak at the White House. Thought of bucket list. But it happened. And I never would have had that opportunity if I hadn't published Disaster Heroes. There's no way.
Yeah, I think it's so amazing. Because obviously I follow you on social media, so I, watch what you're doing. And when you posted that you were speaking at the White House, I was like, what? And then of course I shared it with everybody I knew. I was like, look at Suzanne, she's speaking at the White House.
I remember seeing that. Yeah, that was awesome.
I was like, I think that's so amazing. I mean, it's interesting how writing this book has helped you move your business in a direction that you wanted to move it in, but it's also led you to places where you didn't even know you wanted to go. So before we let you go, I want you to talk a little bit about the connection Disaster Heroes allowed you to make with Stars of Hope.
Sure. Stars of Hope, thank you for giving me a little bit of time to talk about this, an amazing offshoot of the New York Says Thank You Foundation. So you remember when I was telling you the story about Evan and Jeff Parnas from New York City and the New York Says Thank You Foundation? Well, one of the offshoot programs that they have is they get children, they started getting children to paint these 1 foot brightly, and you'll see one of them in the back that says Hope in the background. That's one of the stars. So they're 1 foot wooden stars that Jeff started getting school children to paint back in 2007 when he went to help out to rebuild after a tornado, and saw how the landscape was just so bleak and gray and there was no color there. And he thought, how would we be able to make children or people smile when they come out and they look at this devastation? We want to give them some color back into their life and show them people are caring. So he got children to start thinking about, well, what would make you smile? If you were going through something really bad and everything was darkness, what would you like to see painted on a star, whether it's a word or a color or what a design that would make you smile? And so these children started painting these beautiful stars. And now you'll see these stars are popping up all over the place when you see disasters. Everything from a hurricane to a tsunami halfway across the world to a tornado. And then recently, after the San Bernardino attacks last year, which it'll be a year in December, Jeff had said that he wanted to do the same kind of thing for a community now that was going through a horrible tragedy, but not what we would normally use the stars for, which was in a natural disaster scenario. But he said these people in this community need hope and love even more now. It's right before the holidays, and let's try to let's paint a bunch of stars, and we'll get volunteers to plaster them all across where that site was of the shootings, but also throughout the community of San Bernardino, to show them that America loves them and supports them and there's hope. And so I had the benefit, I raised some money to be able to go there myself, to be one of those first volunteers about a week and a half after those shootings happened, to place these stars that had been painted by people from all across America and Canada to show San Bernardino that we love them. And we ended up getting contacted a couple of weeks later. Our goal was just to go there. We weren't telling anybody. We would go, just plaster that community with stars, come back. If we made somebody smile, our job was done. A couple of weeks later, the survivors started reaching out to us saying how much they had been impacted by and moved by these stars that they saw all over the community. And then they invited us to come to meet with them, to paint stars with them, the survivors and the victims' family members of the San Bernardino terror attacks, so that they could heal and also pay it forward by then giving these stars on behalf of their community to another community that needed it after another disaster. And that's when I realized that's it. I had to be an ambassador for Stars of Hope. So now, one of the things that I always talk about, and I end most of my presentations with now at disaster conferences or whatever I'm speaking at across the world, is talking about this amazing concept of just getting together and painting stars one afternoon or evening, whether it's your company or Girl Guides or whoever it is, to be able to bring back some light and love and hope to these communities through something as basic and simple as painting a star. And I have now seen firsthand how much it helps the survivors and the victims' families heal.
It's one of my favorite things
wow.
that came out of they came out of the
wow.
Disaster Heroes.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's so
So
awesome.
notice when you see coverage of, now that you know what the stars look like, and you know that you'll notice they've come up after Orlando, after any major disaster that you see, you'll start seeing and noticing these stars are popping up in the background. We went to Baton Rouge after the shootings that had happened there, and made sure that we spread out those stars that were painted by people across America again to all of the memorial sites there, from Alton Sterling's site to the police sites, because the whole community needed help and healing. And it was amazing to see that community come together and thank us for being there to support them through what was a really horrible year for them too, and with the floodings now. So we're hoping to go back there next year to be able to lead those communities through a paint workshop to help the survivors from all of the devastation that they've seen in that area over the past year, to help them heal too.
Yeah, it just goes back to the fact that we all do have the power to make a difference in some small way, and it's in our collective effort that change really happens. So, Suzanne, before you go, let everyone know where they can find out more about you and how they can get their hands on Disaster Heroes.
Yeah, so they can find out more about me through my website, which is just myname.com. So I'll spell it out, SuzanneBernier.com. That's SuzanneBernier.com. SuzanneBernier.com. I also have a Twitter handle. If you want to follow me on Twitter, it's at SB, so S as in Sam, B as in Bob, Crisis. And there's also a Twitter handle for Disaster Heroes, which is at Disaster Heroes. There's also a Facebook page, which is Disaster Heroes. And if anybody wants to find out more about me or a bit more about the book or reach out to me, they can contact me directly, and they can find me through my website. And I would love to hear from anybody afterwards on what they thought of the book. And what I love to sometimes hear is what specific story they liked the most and what might have inspired them to do something themselves. So I would appreciate everybody's feedback, and thank you everybody for the opportunity to be able to talk a bit about these amazing people that I have had the chance to now call some of my best friends.
Thank you, Suzanne. And we will also link to Disaster Heroes from our site. And each week before we wrap, we always like to give a shout out to a book that we're reading and enjoying. And this week it's my turn to give a shout out. And I'm shouting out, does it come out backwards for you guys? I guess it does. But it's Ask and It Is Given.
It looks good.
It's called Ask and It Is Given, Learning to Manifest Your Desires by Esther and Jerry Hicks. And what I like about this book is that It is based on the theory that your happiness does not come from your success. Your success comes from your happiness. So that it really starts with being happy before you actually achieve. You will be more successful. The happier you feel inside, the easier it is for you to be successful and to appreciate what you have in life and to continue to create the things that you want. And it's really fun because it gives you essentially games in the back that you can play that just allow you to increase your happiness. And in a time when our country feels very divided, I don't actually believe it is divided, but it feels very divided, and there are things going on all around the world that can cause us to drag our attention to the negativity. I was happy to be reading something that could help me focus on the positivity while still taking action to make things better. So it's called Ask and It Is Given, and it's Learning to Manifest Your Desires by Esther and Jerry Hicks. Carol, take it away.
Oh, wow. I'm glad you gave me a little bit of time to kind of recover myself because, I'm just holding back my tears and emotions. Thank you so much, Suzanne Bernier, for joining us and blessing us really with that awesome story of your book. And I'm really glad that you took the initiative to write the book. So hats off to you. So thank you very much. And we want to thank everyone who's tuned in to join us for this latest podcast edition. We love doing this stuff for you, and we would really appreciate it if you would go to iTunes and please give us an awesome review because we are awesome. So we'd love to see that. But if you want to find out anything else about Write Books That Sell Now, about the podcast, or all the other great things that we have in store, please visit our website at www.writebooks.sellnow.com. And until next time, everyone, please keep writing.
Thanks for listening. Find out more about becoming an author and making the most of your book at writebooks.sellnow.com.